A dog barks when his master is attacked. I would be a coward if I saw that God's truth is attacked and yet would remain silent. John Calvin.
Telling a woman that she can't be an elder is a nonsense rule.
If they claim to be in the body, we let them have it.
Donald Trump is going to win in 2020 by an absolute landslide.
Heretics Christianizing the American dream.
He's depending on us to make people hungry and thirsty by the way we live our lives.
Sowing is a blessing from God to make you rich.
Treating Jesus like a lottery ticket.
The Lord spoke to my heart. Then very few times I've ever heard God be this articulate with me. And I'm telling you word for word, these words came into my heart. I'm not asking you with me. I'm asking you to brush your hair.
We'll do them sharply. That's what God commanded.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Master's Dog, episode 106. I'm your host, Norm, The Master's Dog Dunham, a.k.a. The Evangelical Norm. So, The Master's Dog is a podcast where I deal with false teachers, false doctrines, false gospels, false Christs. If it's false and it's out there and it's in the realm of religion as far as I can deal with it, I respond to it and do what I can. So this started out as a podcast called Faith and Beliefs Refuted, where I was responding to the Faith and Beliefs segment of the Saints Unscripted podcast, which is a Mormon podcast that used to be called Three Mormons. And Faith and Beliefs is the only scripted part of Saints Unscripted, and it is where they started with the Articles of Faith, and I really wanted to just react to those and show how the 13 Articles of Faith of the LDS Church did not line up with mainstream Christianity. And then they continued on after that, so I continued on with them, committed to respond to every video. There are some that I really don't think are that important, that don't need a response, but sticking to my commitment, I have responded to every single one of their videos. Later on, I expanded it to deal with other false teachers and so on, not just Mormonism. And so that's how the Master's Dog was born. So that's a little background for those who are new. We've had a lot of new subscribers. I appreciate that. It comes from you guys who are sharing, watching, liking, subscribing, and so on. And that makes Mr. Algorithm get us out to other people. Actually, it's kind of funny because listening to one of the podcasts that I listened to, Cross-Examine with Kurt Kennedy and Stract, a couple of Christian hip-hop artists, MCs, rappers, spitters, whatever you want to call them. He was actually making a comment that the algorithm is just another term for echo chamber. And I guess that's kind of true. We want people who want to hear what I have to say to find me so they can hear what I have to say. So I don't have a problem with algorithms. So if you haven't already, please like this video, share this video, subscribe, hit the notification button. Then you'll get notified of all the content that is released here on the Evangelical Norm channel here on YouTube. You can check me out on Gab TV, Twitter at The Master's Dog or at The Evangelical Norm, Facebook, Norm Dunham. You can follow me any of those places. Hit me up. Share with me anything that you feel like I should respond to. And I'm open to take requests. So all that being said, all the background given for the podcast, today we are going to be back with our friends from Saints Unscripted. And this is kind of an interesting episode that I did not see coming. I had heard a couple of things once in a while. I hear Mormon people kind of refer to stuff like this, but usually it's just, you just let it go. But so we're going to jump in. We're going to let David talk about, he's going to talk about Greek philosophy and comments that were made about the early Christian church. And are those similarities to things that people have said about the LDS church? And what does that mean? So let's go ahead and we'll get right into it. Here's our friend David Snell from Saints Unscripted.
Hey guys, so I've been doing these Faith and Beliefs videos for a couple of years now, and one thing I've noticed as I've tried to help answer questions.
I've been responding to these videos for a couple of years now.
questions about our faith is that a lot of the criticisms leveled against Latter-day Saints today are the same that existed nearly 200 years ago in Joseph Smith's day. But in this episode, we're going to go back about 2,000 years to a time when Christianity was a minority religion, and we're going to see what one of the first anti-Christian writers...
Okay, now notice that we're not going... We're about 130 years after Christianity, which I guess kind of makes sense because we're more than 100, we're almost 200 years after the advent of Mormonism. So, but still, the writings are fairly late in comparison to what early the beginnings of Christianity were. So I think that's something that we should definitely pay attention to.
A pagan Greek philosopher named Celsus had to say about this radical new cult. You may notice a few similarities.
Okay, let's see what we notice. And what do those similarities mean?
All right, so first of all, for this video, I'm unabashedly using this article from Aaron Christensen as a framework. I'll leave a link in the YouTube description so you can read that in full. But before we look at these parallels, know that I'm not attempting to prove that our truth claims are true, and I'm also not going to be exploring in depth the arguments we're going to look at. There are plenty of other videos for that. We're just looking at patterns.
Okay, so here's the deal. If you're not trying to prove that your truth claims are true, why bother? What's the point? The reality is that's a lie, because as you do this, the underlying motive, whether you admit to it or not, is that you are trying to prove that your truth claims are true. That's just being intellectually honest.
For example, to discourage people from learning more about Christianity, in addition to attacking the founder of the group, Celsus also...
Okay, so I talked about this last week, and it's not so much that these terms and stuff are used to diminish the interest in learning about. It is, I mean, in many instances, it is to reflect the things that we have found, that we believe about the LDS religion. And I don't care how much people learn about it. I mean, I am actually using some of the terminology and so on. I am teaching them about it, and I'm not misrepresenting what Mormons believe. I was a Mormon till I was 19 years old. So really, if you want to be technical about it, I was only a Mormon for 11 years from the time I was baptized until I left at 19 years old. But I mean, I had been in the church my whole life. I had been a member for 11 years. So I'm not misrepresenting what they believe. I'm giving you what they believe, and then I use terminology. And again, we talked last week in the whole issue about it being a cult, that I don't use the word cult anymore to define them. There are some cult-ish aspects and traits to the LDS religion, but I would not consider them a cult outright now because when we hear that word and we use that word, and we immediately think of Jim Jones, and we think of Jonestown and Heaven's Gate and stuff like that. Which no, I would not put the Mormons in that now. In Joseph Smith's day, probably I would have, and even later through Brigham Young and some of the other prophets. Ezra Taft Benson's speech, 14 Fundamentals of a Prophet, is definitely a cultish thing, and you should check that out. There's an episode of The Master's Dog on that back somewhere. I'll see if I can find it and put the link in the description.
Attacks the character of those who were close to the founder or witnessed key events. About the resurrection, Celsus wrote, "Who really saw this? A hysterical woman, as you admit, and perhaps one other person, both deluded by Christ's sorcery, or else so wrenched with grief at his failure that they hallucinated him rising from the dead by some sort of wishful thinking. This mistaking a fantasy for reality is not at all uncommon. Indeed, it has happened to thousands."
Okay, that's a false statement. So if you're trying to come up with similarities, and he's going to give the similarities of what people have said about Joseph Smith, that's a false statement. And if you can prove that what people are saying about Joseph Smith and so on is a false statement, which I'm going to make one here in a minute, and it won't be a false statement, and I'll give you a kind of a comparison of what I'm talking about. But if you can prove that it's a false statement, which is what this man said, then the Celsus is absolutely false in what he's saying here. Then it's pointless to continue on with the argument. And he is wrong, and I'll tell you why.
People in our era approached the witnesses of the Book of Mormon plates in a similar fashion. One skeptic wrote that Joseph Smith caused the witnesses to hallucinate, perhaps through strong suggestion or something like hypnosis. One website asserts that what the witnesses saw was the result of an active imagination, wishful thinking, and magic worldview. Early critics of our...
Okay, so I'm going to hold off. I'm going to let him continue on. I don't want to get into those weeds now because that could take us a little bit. But I'm going to hold off on that. So remember that statement. The issue of who witnessed the resurrection, one crazy hysterical woman, and then the issue of the witnesses of the Book of Mormon. And we're going to take a look at that and show how one is not a valid statement and one is absolutely a valid statement.
Our faith also launched attacks on the character of the general membership. An 1831 newspaper described Latter-day Saints as generally of the dregs of community and the most unlettered people that can be found anywhere. The whole gang of these deluded mortals, except a few hypocrites, are profound believers in witchcraft, ghosts, goblins, etc.
One more word about fairies and goblins, and I swear.
Of early Christians, Celsus wrote, "Taking root in the lower classes, the religion continues to spread among the vulgar. Nay, one can even say that it spreads because of its vulgarity and the illiteracy of its adherents. Christian leaders want and are able to convince only the foolish, dishonorable, and stupid."
So, this statement is, what he's saying here reflects what Paul said. The gospel of Christ is foolishness to those who consider themselves wise, but to those of us who believe it is the power of God unto salvation. So again, I have no problem with that. And I would not make a statement, a sweeping statement about the intelligence or the status or anything of the believers, the early believers of the Mormon Church. Anyone can be deceived. I mean, Christ, or in the New Testament, when Jesus talks about the false Christ and so on, he says, if it were possible, even the elect would be deceived. So I have no problem with, who that was. I know that they were deceived by Joseph Smith and his successors down the line.
I didn't know you could read.
Celsus also characterized Christians as either gullible or willfully ignorant. Only a blind faith explains the hold Jesus has on their imagination. It reminds me of how a certain popular Broadway musical characterizes Latter-day Saints.
I am a Mormon, and dang it, a Mormon just believes.
But Celsus doesn't stop there. He also attacks Christian scripture.
Okay, coming to that whole issue of the Book of Mormon, the musical, and so on, and Mormon just believes. It's in the speech that Ezra Taft Benson gave in 1974, the 14 Fundamentals of the Prophet. When the leader speaks, when the prophet speaks, the thinking has been done. He said it. That is that song there is a statement based off of what a former prophet who is now dead, who was not a prophet at the time, but was relating to the current prophet, said in a speech to the general membership of the church. And he basically said, don't question, just believe. Exactly the opposite. Sorry, didn't mean to bump the mic. Exactly the opposite of what the Apostle Paul tells us to do in the Bible. He says, be like the Bereans, who didn't just believe what we said, but they tested it. So you've got Ezra Taft Benson telling the Mormons just to believe and trust when the prophet speaks, the thinking has been done. And then Paul. So again, you have these contrasting where Celsus is absolutely wrong because Paul was a very educated man, and many of the early church members, Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus. We have examples of very learned men who are followers of Christ who are saying, question us, test us. Then you have what Mormons freely admit, that Joseph Smith was not a very smart dude. They actually rely on that for their proof that the Book of Mormon is true, which I disagree with. I don't think Joseph Smith was stupid or dull or just a local yokel or uneducated. But they rely on that to talk about the founder of the religion as an uneducated, kind of grassrootsy kind of guy. They rely upon that. So, what's the problem?
He calls the books of Moses absolute garbage and claims that some Christian scriptures and practices were plagiarized or stolen from other sources. It is clear to me that the writings of the Christians are a lie and that your fables have not been well enough constructed to conceal this monstrous fiction.
Okay, and now again, in 175, this is something, but now here we are 2,000 years later, or so, 1,925 years later, and the words of the books of Moses and the New Testament scriptures have stood the test of time and every test that everybody has put it to. I mean, Voltaire said at one point, a couple of hundred years ago, whenever Voltaire was around, I don't know the exact time frame, whether it was 17 or 18 or hundreds or whatever, but he said in 100 years there won't be a Bible to be found except in a museum. So there are people saying the same things years later, hundreds of years, thousands of years later, and yet still the Bible continues to stand the test of time. The Book of Mormon, completely different. Does not stand up to any of the typical tests, historicity, geography, archaeology, bibliology. None of those things does the Book of Mormon stand up to. I mean, we have thousands, tens of thousands of manuscripts of the Bible, and zero original manuscripts of the Book of Mormon because it was all taken away to heaven.
One 19th century source notes that the Book of Mormon is perhaps one of the weakest productions ever attempted to be palmed off as a divine revelation. It is mostly a blind mass of words interwoven with scriptural language and quotations without much of a leading plan or design. And of course, as we've addressed in other videos,
Mark Twain said it was chloroform in print. Many, many times in the few times that I was able to read the Book of Mormon cover to cover, which I did a couple of times with ulterior motives to get rewarded for what I had done. But so many times I would try to read the Book of Mormon and fall asleep while reading it because it is dull, it is poorly written, it is repetitive, and it is plagiarized.
There's no shortage of claims that Joseph stole ideas or plagiarized from other sources. Celsus points out that Christians believe both the words of Moses and the words of Jesus, but says this man from Nazareth gives an opposing set of laws. Who is to be disbelieved, Moses or Jesus?
Again, that's not... Jesus never contradicted Moses, and it can be proven. We can go through everywhere where anyone tries to claim that Jesus is contradicting Moses, we can show where he is not, where he is actually fulfilling the words of Moses, not contradicting. But the Book of Mormon, different versions from 1830s to early 1900s to 1970s to 1980s to 1990s to now in the 2000s has changed multiple times and absolutely have had contradictory changes.
Similarly, Latter-day Saints believe in both the Bible and the Book of Mormon, but many claim that the Book of Mormon contradicts the Bible, so one or the other must be false.
This town ain't big enough for the two of her.
Actually, it's not the Book of Mormon that contradicts the Bible, because the Book of Mormon lines up very well with the Bible because it plagiarizes a whole lot of the Bible. It's the Doctrine and Covenants and Pearl of Great Price. That you failed to mention, that is what contradicts the Bible.
Celsus attempted to estrange Christianity from the more popular Judaism by claiming Christians believed in a different God. When you Christians find things made difficult for you by the Jews, you come around and say that you worship the same God as they do. What is to be believed? For when your master, Jesus, lays down laws contrary to those laid down by Moses, you immediately undertake to find another God, one who is different from the Father. Similarly, you don't have to go far to find claims that Latter-day Saints believe in a different Jesus because their Jesus supposedly contradicts the biblical Jesus. Celsus also says
Okay. So now we have to deal with the fact that the God as we see him in Christianity and as he is defined in the Bible is different than as the Jews worship Yahweh, Elohim, Adonai, whatever terminology they want to use, because they do not recognize the triune God. So in that sense, yes, we have a different God from the God of the Jews, because we recognize him differently than they do. We recognize Jesus as God, the Holy Spirit as God, God the Father as God. They only see God the Father. They think Jesus is anathema, he is a heretic, he is an abomination, and they have no use for the Holy Spirit. So, to be absolutely true, yeah, we do. And that's why we would consider Jews not saved. But it is absolutely true that Mormons and Christians believe in different Jesus. Because the Jesus of Mormonism is the brother of Lucifer, the spirit offspring of Elohim and a spiritual wife, is not the creator of all things, but a co-organizer of all things alongside of Michael the Archangel. So he didn't create all things. He's not eternal in the sense that he was born of a spirit mother and then born of Mary. But so he is not the eternal God. He is not from eternity to eternity. He is not Alpha and Omega. The Christ of Christianity is God the Son, the second person of the Trinity, is the creator of all things, including Lucifer, not his brother. Is eternal from eternity to eternity. He is God. From everlasting to everlasting, he is God. He is the Alpha and the Omega. He is co-eternal, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. He is everything equally with God the Father, just in an economic hierarchy. He is submitted to the Father as the Son, as the Holy Spirit submits to the Father and the Son. So we see the Trinity. So absolutely we have two different Jesuses between Christianity and Mormonism.
Suggests that you can't trust Christians to teach you the truth about their faith because the writings of the disciples contain only those facts about Jesus that put a flattering face on the events of his life. Indeed, what I know to be the case and what your disciples tell are two very different stories.
Now, here's the problem. Again, Celsus is 175 years later than Jesus. All he has to go on are the what has been written about him and so on. He didn't know him. He wasn't a follower or anything like that. And when you look at it, the disciples didn't just put a flattering face on the life of Jesus. I mean, there are a lot of things in there that are embarrassing that you would not put. You know, the fact that in his own hometown, he wasn't able to do the same miracles. A prophet is not accepted in his own hometown. His brothers and sisters called him crazy. You know, you would not put these things if you were just trying to put a flattering face. The Mormons try to sweep this stuff about Joseph Smith and have tried for years to hide those realities about multiple wives and so on under the rug. The apostles wrote about those things. His family thought he was nuts.
Similar charges of bias and deception are levied against our faith. The list goes on, but why am I telling you this? Well, first of all, I'd be lying if I didn't note a bit of irony in the parallels, and I wonder if the Latter-day Saint faith might be a bit misunderstood, as early Christians were.
No. They're the same picture.
But on a more serious note, I think Christ said it best in Matthew 7. In everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you. Christians, or anyone, do you appreciate how Celsus approaches Christianity? If you don't, then let's not use the same approach as we interact with those of other faiths.
Well, I have no problem with the way Celsus approaches Christianity. It doesn't bother me at all because he's wrong. So, and if I were in a false religion, I would want someone to tell me, in the same way that Celsus was trying to do, or in the same way that I and other evangelists, apologists, and so on are trying to tell the Mormon people. That is what we would want. So you cite the golden rule, but I would want people to come to me and point out the erroneous fallaciousness of my false religion.
Let's give people the benefit of the doubt and be patient yet cautious with the Celsuses. I'm not saying we should never disagree or offer constructive criticism. I'm not saying every critic of our faith is a Celsus, and I'm not saying that early Christians or Latter-day Saints have never done anything worth criticizing. But let's not be so quick to pass judgment on groups we may not understand or whose beliefs may be different from our own. Personally, I've found it helpful to assume that everyone is making the best spiritual decisions they can for their lives, no matter which faith they belong to. Check out the resources in the description for more info on this topic, and have a great day.
All right, so the one thing I wanted to come back to, and that is the whole issue of eyewitnesses and witnesses and so on. So when Celsus says, and I've never heard of this Celsus guy until now anyway, so that's one weird thing that he just suddenly is popping up, that no one has ever brought him up in the past, but that's neither here nor there. But when Celsus says, who saw this? One hysterical woman and maybe one other person? No, what does Paul say about the resurrection? Jesus appeared to, well, Paul doesn't say that he appeared to Mary in the garden, but he appeared to Peter and the other apostles, and then to him as one abnormally born. He says to first before to Paul, he says, then Jesus appeared to over 500 of the brothers, eyewitnesses of the resurrected Christ, 500 people, and Paul says many of them who are still alive today. What Paul was saying to those readers and those people at the time were, go talk to them. Go talk to the over 500 or close to 500 eyewitnesses, because obviously some of them had died, because he says some of them are still alive. Go talk to them. They saw it. 500. Not 11 or 8. 500 men, and then Paul said, and then he appeared to me as one abnormally born. So all the people, Paul says, here is the evidence, and there's tons of it. Now let's look at the Mormon witnesses. They said they saw it with the eye of faith. I mean, that casts doubt upon what they're saying, period, that they saw it with the eye of faith. They're not even really sure if they saw it physically or if it was, if they couldn't see it until God gave them enough faith to see it. And then so many of them left the Mormon church. Now, whether or not they renounced their specific witness testimony, they were no longer members of this church that they were so confident in at one point in time. So there's your issue with the eyewitnesses, and that is a huge, huge difference between the two. So do the similarities, what about the similarities? So what? The similarities are Celsus was absolutely wrong in all the things that he said about Christianity and early Christianity, and it can be proven. Mormonism does not stand up to the same criticisms. And it can be proven. And that's where we'll leave it. So hopefully you guys found this to be helpful. Again, if you have any suggestions for anything that I can respond to, false teachers, to put in the false teacher of the week, which is coming up soon. I'll get that recorded and posted. Leave those in the comments or hit me up again on Twitter. Anywhere where you can follow me on social media, I'm willing to take your requests for false doctrines and false teachings to put in the Master's Dog podcast. So thank you guys for watching. And as always, preach the gospel at all times. Use words. They're necessary. And until next time, Soli Deo Gloria.